in the territory in that area back to its actual borders to the days of Solomon and David, which is amazing in and of itself because of the large amount of people who were trying to keep that from happening. They were outnumbered probably 10-1, and yet they were still successful in being able to accomplish that. And of course, the mentality that they possessed was that they were God's people and that God would bless their efforts, and that gave them the motivation to prevail, even though from a military standpoint they shouldn't have been able to, but they would not give up. And that same mentality to some extent even exists today with that group of people that live in Israel now. You know, they're not God's chosen people, that they got that mentality. And if you were going to have a raid on Entebbe, then you got the guys over there that can do that and do it successfully, as that's a historical event that we're well aware of. And I think we even saw that movie when I was in high school. They showed that movie. And because of that same type of determination to not allow themselves to be exterminated, as was tried during Nazism, of course. And of course, that willingness to defend themselves that wasn't the first time that came about, of course, as because all the way back here to this period of time in between the Testaments that we have heroes that are looked upon as heroes even today, along the same lines as the David of Old Testament history, because of their willingness to put their best foot forward and to lead an uprising that would throw off the shackles of the heathen. Now, of course, we made the observation as well on Sunday, I think, that one of the things that they ended up doing, of course, was they were requiring circumcision of those who were not under a law that required circumcision, and so they ended up becoming quite hypocritical, because that which they had opposed and somebody telling them they couldn't practice their religion, now they were forcing others to practice their religion. So, you know, I guess to the winner goes the spoils, and if you've got the upper hand, then all of a sudden might makes right, you know. Being in here talking about this woman who was this woman named Alexandra. This is number 4 at the bottom of page 25. She was the wife of Alexander Janneus, who had been appointed queen by her husband. Now, of course, if you are powerful enough that you can hold sway over civil authority, such as is existing here, then of course you're in that position. She is. She has a son. He's got the name Hyrcanus, but he's of course the second, and he appointed him as high priest. And because Hyrcanus favored the Pharisees, but her younger son Aristobulus wanted to be king, and the Sadducees found in this second son a champion for them. And so as time goes on, the mama dies. He defeats Hyrcanus, forced him to give up his office, and then he became what I thought that the Lord was the only one that could be this, you know, both king and priest at the same time, you know. Now, how is that not possible given the law of Moses? For somebody to be a priest and a king at the same time. All right. Kingly tribe was Judah, okay? And the priestly tribe was Levi. So you couldn't have an individual who is from both tribes at the same time. So while we know all the way back over in Zechariah, where the prophecy is made, Zechariah chapter 6, concerning Jesus being, or one coming later on who would be on the throne and be a high priest at the same time, of course, has reference to something other than the law of Moses, obviously. Because under the law of Moses, those two offices could not be held by the same person. But yet we know that Jesus does hold those same offices, those same offices, yeah. And so obviously it's not according to the law of Moses that he holds those offices. He, of course, holds those offices in heaven. And, of course, that's the culmination of Peter's sermon that's recorded for us in Acts chapter 2, that God's made that same Jesus whom you crucified both Lord and Christ, you know. And so he fits in the position as being our high priest. At the same time, he's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, that's not possible if Judaism, if the law of Moses is still in effect, because you can't have that happen. And what happened here a few decades prior to the coming of John the Immerser. And then there's a quotation here that sort of draws a conclusion I think is deserving of us reading. The story of the Hasmoneans draws to an end with the account of one Antipater, governor of Idumea, who encouraged Hyrcanus in exile to remove his brother from office. Now you would think, isn't this the way it always works? I mean, all the way back to where we was looking at the divided kingdom and how here you got family members that are knocking each other off to take the position of power and authority that goes along with it, and all the pride and prestige and the money, I guess, and the women and all that, is deserving then of doing terrible things to those that you're kin to. But yet that happens all the way up to the time that Jesus makes his way, born of a virgin, born under the law. With the help of an Arabian ruler, he besieged Aristobulus in Jerusalem. It was at this point that Rome decided they were going to interfere in the matters that were going on in Palestine. They had been sort of standing back and just receiving tax money up until this moment of time. But the Pompey sent a general to try to stop the uprising that was happening. And of course, there you see the supply of bribery that comes into the picture, where you got money changing hands in order to make things turn out like Rome wanted to turn out. And then that didn't work out to the desire that Pompey wanted. And so he in person did not trust Aristobulus. And so he attacked Jerusalem and conquered it. He went in person, his own self, into the temple and the Holy of Holies. Of course, he's not supposed to go there. The only person that's ever supposed to go into the Holy of Holies is who? Is the high priest. And he only goes in there one day of the year, see? So here, all this violation of the law of Moses is taking place before their very eyes. They're seeing this happen. And they take Aristobulus as captive to Rome. And then Hyrcanus was confirmed to the high priesthood and was appointed ethnarch of Judea, which was now added to the province of Syria. So here you've got the changing over of who's in charge, but yet all under the auspices of the Roman government, because they are fixing, of course, to be the prevailing power and say what goes where. Now, when it comes to the Roman Empire, as far back as I can remember, the main thing that I always heard from sermons by preachers about Rome and the Roman Empire was that the world was guilty of the things that the Roman Empire brought its destruction to. The things that ended up being so much in existence in the Roman Empire that caused it to crumble. Those types of same things were happening in the United States of America. And of course, this goes all the way back, to the 60s. And I dare say that 50 years before that, of course I wasn't there then, but 50 years before then, preachers were probably saying the same thing, The things, and what were some of those things that led to the downfall of the Roman Empire? What was a prevailing sin? Homosexuality, for sure, It wasn't something they kept a secret either. There was no such thing as in the closet homosexuals in the Roman Empire. All but one of the homosexuals, of the Caesars, admitted to being homosexual, And of course, some bisexual. So that was something, a prevailing sin, of course, that is not beneficial to any nation. I mean, when you take a principle like righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is reproach to any people, while we do not put homosexuality as the greatest sin ever, it's obviously one of many that will cause a nation to crumble for sure. And it did, of course, with this nation here. I was reading somebody, I can't remember if it was in Christian Courier or what. It may have been in Seek the Old Paths. Anyhow, some Brotherhood publication this past week I was reading, and they were quoting from this United Methodist preacher, and he was talking about how God's work is done through abortion, and how that the world is going to have to accept the changes that have happened and accept homosexuality as a viable lifestyle for everyone. And of course, you know that just recently when they had their every 2-year gathering, the whole idea of sanctioning homosexual marriages and allowing homosexuals to be ordained in the United Methodist Church was voted down, but it was only like 51 to 49. Okay, it was real close vote. And so now, and this was even on the news here a couple of weeks ago, now they're trying to decide how they're going to divide, because they're going to divide. You know, there's going to be a pro-homosexual group, and then there's going to be a pro-Bible group as it relates to homosexuality. And you can pick which one you want. You can still be a United Methodist, but you're not going to be united with everybody that's United Methodist. See, there are going to be 2 different groups, at least those 2. And of course, that's not the only thing that will divide them, but that's certainly one of the prevailing things that will divide them. And that existed in the Roman Empire up to and including one of the things that led to its destruction, obviously. What was another thing? Abortion, killing babies, you know. And that was a word that blew my mind when I first became aware of it. It would talk about exposure, you know. They'd expose their babies. They just leave them laying there, you know. And of course, doesn't take, you know, very long for a child to be left to its own. Absolutely. And we even read about that in some of these other world powers, because it wanted to keep everything within the family. Well, make sure you did that, then you married your sister or your brother or something, so you keep all the family together, you see. And then what else about the marriage and the home that was prevalent? Divorce. The United States didn't come up with no-fault divorces. That existed during the Roman Empire. No-fault divorces. You got tired of looking at her or tired of looking at him, and so a divorce could be granted for no reason at all. So when you see all these things, and that's just a few, of course, taxation. They were taxed plumb silly, you know. They've had good roads, there's no doubt about it, but building those big roads everywhere to get the army wherever it needed to go cost money. And so there was really very little of a middle class in Rome. And is that not something that we've seen to be taking place in the United States of America? The eroding of the middle class to the point where it keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. That's just 2 groups, you know. There's no middle ground in that, see. And so those are some situations society-wise that were unget-overable when you put all of them together, that it had to crumble. It could not keep up that forever. Now, it lasted hundreds and hundreds of years, but obviously the power that it once enjoyed began to wane, and they were then, of course, became a hiss and a byword before long because of all of these typical things that we see in existence in our country as well. Now, mythologically speaking, where did Rome come from? Oh, Romulus and Remus. And you may have very well have seen in a so-called history book, because it's not historical, but it may have been in a history book anyhow. Here you got these kids, you know, and they are being nursed by an animal, you know. And I see, and of course that, you know, that sort of like, I guess that's the first idea that led to Tarzan, you know. He was not a she-wolf, you know. He was had monkeys that raised him, you know. But that's ridiculous. But yet that is the so-called traditional way of looking at the beginning. And of course, from a very humble beginning such as that would be, you know, then it did grow into be a world-conquering group for sure. And all this first page does is tells about the development over the years of wars here and there, And there's a whole lot of good books that record some of the battles and some of the people that lived during this period of time and their exploits and all. But there again, it's not inspired history, so you gotta take it with a grain of salt, as to how close it is to reality. I mean, if you grant somebody that the country arose from these two boys, then there's no telling what else you might have to expect to swallow, which of course is not accurate either. Down here at the bottom of the page, notice here in letter D, Pompey intervened, and we talked about this just a minute ago, in the civil dispute between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. He took the side of Hyrcanus, who was appointed the high priest and ethnarch. Now there's a different type of name, ethnarch, which of course carries with it power, but just among that ethnic group, the Jews, you see. He's in charge, but not as a representative of and under the Roman government, and only in that sense. And it says, and once again, the Jews lost their independence when Pompey brought them under the yoke of the heathen. Okay? Now, they'd been acting pretty heathen-like themselves up to this moment in time, but now they are in full-blown under the auspices of the Roman Empire. And then the quotation there from a book entitled Between the Testaments, from this time forward, the spirit of Jewish nationalism sprang into revolt and continued right down to AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the Jewish state. So now here we're talking about a small time frame, as we've been talking about passage of hundreds of years, but here we have within a 100-year period of time, and this nationalism will end up developing to the point where you end up being wiped off the map, as was the nation of Israel in the destruction of all that would keep them separate as far as the genealogy is concerned and all, and with the destruction of Jerusalem. And you could how do I want to say this? Because of the catastrophe that did occur in AD 70, if a person was not cognizant of what the Bible had said previous to this event and wanted to make this the biggest thing the Bible dealt with no Bible knowledge, then they could do that. And that's what's happened even with some of our own brethren. And their AD 70 doctrine, their realized eschatology doctrine, they've made it the crowning achievement or the crowning event of the whole Bible. It's not in Acts chapter 2. It's in AD 70 at the destruction of the Jewish nation. Of course, and we're probably going to have to do some more work on that, seeing how that congregations are being destroyed or split or converted to this line of reasoning by too many times down through, especially in Missouri and even all the way down into Alabama and Memphis and other places too. Merrill Tenney mentions Antipater, who is an Idumean. Now, remember, what did we say about an Idumean? Who are these people? They're from the Edomites, of course. So we're talking about kinfolk way back, but they are in a position now where they're going to be extending influence and involved in what goes on in Jerusalem and the surrounding area when the disciples are trying to accomplish what God wants them to accomplish. Notice it says they had been there with the letter A under 2. They had been pushed out of their territory southeast of the Dead Sea by the Arabs. Now they lived around Hebron. And of course, as we've already noticed, John Hyrcanus, compelled them to be a part of Judah and caused them to be circumcised and all that while he was in order, when he was in charge. And of course, that influence then caused them to not like very well those who would compel something like that on them when they didn't agree to live under that covenant, for sure. They were forced to. And he was this fella Antipater was supported by Pompey until his death in 47. And then here's allegiance that switched to somebody that's more familiar to us, especially from the Roman Empire, and that's, of course, Julius Caesar, who was, of all things, a rival to the previous leader in Pompeii. And what Caesar did, he granted favors to the Jews in Palestine, and he granted favors to Jews in the dispersion. What's the dispersion? Wherever they're at, located within the Roman Empire, they get the same privileges as do those who happen to be living in Palestine, particularly. And of course, you know, that helps. You have friends. If you are treated favorably, then obviously you're going to be more likely to go along with their leadership, and if they're not making you do something that you don't want to do. But of course, that didn't last long, because notice here it says Antipater was made governor of Judea, and Roman citizenship was conferred on him. Of course, that was no good, because the Jews hated him because he wasn't a Jew. He was a descendant ultimately of Esau, of all things. He had two sons, and one of them, of course, his name was Herod. Caesar was assassinated. Antipater was poisoned. Cassius now was ruling over Syria and Palestine. So, I mean, this is covering a whole lot of time frame here to get to where we want to get. But, and I don't want to read all this material. But notice down at letter J, which sort of is a summary, although Palestine remained nominally independent until Herod's death, its real sovereignty lay in the hands of the Roman legate of Syria, and later in the command of the procurators. Throughout the period of the New Testament, the shadow of Rome fell over the land, and under its oppression and protection, Christianity was born and flourished. In other words, and what's amazing is even when they were protected, they actually did better when they were being persecuted than when they were being protected, as far as faithfulness goes. I mean, you'd think the opposite, but in reality, you know, when things are easy, then it's sort of like, remember at the end of the book of Esther, when Mordecai and all the Jews are allowed to defend themselves, then it says there were many proselytes made, you know. So while they were enjoying success, people said, yeah, I want to be a Jew too, you know. Yeah, can I be a Jew? Because they were being able to defend themselves and take the spoil of those that were attacking them. And so it looked favorable to them to be a part of this group who previously were going to be exterminated by Haman, of course, and that didn't happen. And maybe some of that plays into the situation here too. But when you have no price to pay to be faithful, then just about anybody can do it. But the faithfulness involved in following faithfully with what God had required, the cream of the crop comes to the forefront when difficulties arise. You know, it's like, you know, we use the example when the children of Israel were allowed to go back to Palestine after 70 years of punishment and discipline at the hands of the first, of course, the Babylonians, then the Medo-Persians. Then you would have thought that those 50,000 plus, a few that went back, would have been the very best that money could buy, you know, the very best, the most faithful. But yet, as soon as they get back there, it's pretty obvious they're not, you know. What was their motivation for going back? It says, all right, we got to get back there and build the temple and reestablish worship. Well, first little bit of opposition they faced, you know, they quit working on the temple and just started working on their own houses while the temple of God was lying waste, you know. And then their intermarriage with the heathens of the land brought, of course, the disapproval of God, and had to express it through Nehemiah and Ezra, of course. And so far from them being what they should have been, you know, we can't really commend them for their faithfulness, because they weren't, you know. And of course, the other ones that didn't go back because of their entanglements with wherever they happened to be, and They had businesses, they had kinfolks, or their children had intermarried with the heathen, and so you couldn't run off and leave your grandkids like that, and so they just stayed put and didn't go back to Palestine. And then all this happens here during this intertestament period, and so you still have the problem of who's willing to actually be faithful, you know. And of course, that's a prevailing question even today, you know, as well. What does faithfulness involve, you know? What does it take to be faithful?
When the Israelites came up out of Egypt, when they gave them the promised land, a lot of them married the heathens. And now this is several hundred years later, when this what we're talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder how they determined how many of them were Jews and how many of them
Yeah.
were married to the others.
Yeah.
Back in our country years ago, when they had the Jim Crow laws, you know, down in the Deep South, they said that if you're 25% black, you're black.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I guess maybe they had something like that then. If you're 25% Jew, you're Jew.
Yeah, I don't know how they went about making that determination, and of course, you know, you've got people like Rahab, who figures in the genealogy of Jesus, you know, along with Tamar, and I mean, so here's all this intermarrying that did take place, and of course, the pure bloodline, of course. That whole concept of a pure bloodline was meant to be a spiritually pure bloodline, you know. And of course, it's like the people that try to trace their ancestry back to, like, missionary Baptist. They trace their religious organization back to the early 1800s, you know. And the way they do it, you can't be a preacher unless you were baptized by one of their own, see. And so they trace themselves all the way back to like 1817 or something like that, you know. Well, what about before then? I mean, you've got to go all the way back. You can't just stop there. Who baptized that guy that started keeping the records, you know? If he wasn't baptized by the right guy, according to their doctrine, see, then he wasn't a missionary Baptist at all anyhow, see. So they went to great lengths to try to draw this line of succession down through the years, and of course they fall far short of it, for sure. All right, down here at the bottom, here's Pontius Pilate. We're down to the days of Jesus now, of course. When you read in the book of Luke, of course, we have the time frame in which all this is being carried out. Pilate is the governor of Judea. And of course, we read just a few minutes ago that he moves everything all the way over to Jerusalem and makes people mad at him because of that, and rightfully so. They're upset with him. And notice it says, according to history, Pilate made an immediate impression upon the Jews when he moved his army headquarters from Caesarea to Jerusalem. They marched into the city with the Roman standards, bearing the image of the divine emperor, and set up headquarters right in the corner of the temple in a palace fortress called Antonia, which didn't go over well with the Jews. Now, why would the Jews especially be so upset with something like this? What would be one thing that would stick out as being in total opposition to what the Jews would allow?
Well, they were expecting an earthly king, and they knew this wasn't it.
All right. Absolutely, their whole concept of the kingdom was wrong. But here they were seeing the worship of mere human beings and the idolatry that went along with it. Remember we said that while the 70 years of discipline at the hands of the Babylonians and Middle Persians, you know, was to break one of the prevailing sins of the Jews, of course, was idolatry. And as a nation, idolatry was never again a prevailing sin, you know. So it broke them from that. And then here you got these supposed godlike people who are the leaders of the Roman government, and they are deserving of worship, they said, we can't abide by that, We can't. And of course, that was a problem as well. That was forced upon Christians when they obeyed the gospel too. They had to bow in allegiance, not just to the powers that be, and living under, but they had to recognize as deity these Caesars. Well, they weren't no more deity than a monkey is, But yet they were required to do that to show their willingness to submit to the authority of Rome. And of course, notice it says a quotation from Josephus. Pilate quickly learned that their zealous nature and political power within the province, and according to Josephus, ordered the standards to be returned to Caesarea. So here they had enough power, or they said that's not going to happen here. You're going to have to turn around and take these matters and things that you brought from Caesarea. You're going to have to take them back up there. And then at the top of the next page, there's an account that's given. And of course, again, this is not inspired history, but it's one who was there as an eyewitness of these events, or at least an ear witness of much that went on there. Tells us about Pontius Pilate and how he was removed from office. A religious fanatic arose in Samaria who promised the Samaritans if they would assemble on Mount Gerizim, he would show them the sacred vessels which Moses had hidden there. Somebody says, well, that's the silliest thing I've heard. Sounds sort of like the beginning of a whole lot of religious denominational groups, silver plates that are buried up in New York State somewhere, and Joseph Smith just happened to find them and be able to translate them. What's the difference? Ain't a bit of difference. They're both lies, you see. But yet here's someone claiming to have access to something everybody else don't have. And so they are ones who need to be listened to because they know more clearly than you do. And so they're going to lead you if you'll just let them do that, see. And sadly, by the millions, they do that. They do lead them. There's a very good, we just got a letter this past week. There's a seminar type of arrangement that's available, and I'm pretty sure that the same thing is on World Video Bible School, at least to some extent, from a boy who preaches out in California now, but he came out of Mormonism. And he's written, seemed like about 14 or 15 articles that's been in Seek the Old Paths that he writes concerning, because he was raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was in a family that was Mormon. He was a Mormon till he was 25, I think, something like that. And he learned the truth, But he tells you what they believe, why they believe it, and then exposes what they believe in the light of the Scripture, And of course, if you're having Bible studies with Mormons, then you need to know your P's and Q's for sure, or they can tie you up in knots. Of course, just about anybody can, if you don't know your P's and Q's, and have a good handling of the Scripture. And so this fanatic tried to get a following. A multitude came out to the sacred mountain of the Samaritans. Of course, remember, that's the same mountain that the woman at Jacob's well and in John chapter 4 is making reference to, Mount Gerizim. They went up to the mountain, but before they could, they were attacked by the cavalry of Pilate, and a bunch of them were killed. The Samaritans sent an embassy to Vitellius, who was a man in charge at Syria, and accused Pilate of murdering innocent people. And then that particular legate, who wanted to maintain friendship with the Jews, he took Pilate out and appointed Marcellus in his place. And then Pilate had to go to Rome and answer the charges against him. And before he could get there, then Tiberius had died. And so what all happened regarding that, I'm not sure how that worked out. But can you imagine, here's Rome that was holding a man responsible for killing innocent people. How many innocent people did they kill, by the scores they did. But here was a reason. The reason for it was not that they were they didn't want innocent people being killed. They wanted to have the same type of authority and the same type of following in Jerusalem that had existed before, and you can't do that if you're going around killing people and making them mad at you. And so it was for their own benefit that they did that, of course, as is often the case. There's much of this rest of this page here corresponds with the book of Acts. As you'll see references in here from the book of Acts to these individuals who were in position of power. I preached a sermon a few years ago on the Herods on a Sunday night, you know, and I was unaware of just how despicable and bloodthirsty that family, that whole family of the Herods was, even the women. I mean, they were just some rough and mean characters, but they did it all to defend themselves and their powerful position and all that went along with it, you know. And when you're bound and determined to hang on to control, then there's no telling what you might end up doing. And of course, they did just about everything that could be done to defend themselves, for sure. The bell is going to ring suddenly. By Sunday, we'll begin looking at the Herods and the connection of the Herods family to the Samaritans, and give us a little bit more insight into the thinking of the Samaritans and their refusal to succumb to and to fall in line with Judaism, all that developed, of course, all the way back to the time of the divided kingdom, for sure. And we'll look at all that as well. Any comments? Thank you much.